Teach me your way, and I will walk in it. Teach me your way, and I will walk in it. Lean in and listen to my voice. Oh my God, I've been calling to you all.
Hi everybody, it's good to be back with you again for Sunday School, 3rd through 6th grade at Ebenezer United Church of Christ in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Today is April 18th, and a lot has happened over the last 3 weeks. And today we're going to go back and take a look at the events starting with Palm Sunday, going through Easter, and then talk about what happened in the early days of the Christian church after Christ had been crucified and resurrected. So we're going to start with Palm Sunday, which is the day that Jesus entered Jerusalem and received somewhat of a hero's welcome. Prior to that, Jesus had been preaching in the towns and the countryside outside of Jerusalem, and so he had become somewhat well known, and people liked what he had to say. So he was greeted with a lot of enthusiasm when he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey. Of course, at this time, Jesus already knew himself that he was going to die a violent death in the relatively near future. The Jewish leaders in Jerusalem did not like Jesus or his message. They felt threatened by him, and they were jealous of the enthusiasm that the people were showing for him. So they determined that they needed to find a way to get rid of Jesus, and they took several steps to do that. They found a member of Jesus's group, Judas, and offered to pay him big money if he would betray Jesus. So that takes us to Maundy Thursday, or Holy Thursday. Jesus and the disciples got together in the upper room for the Last Supper, and during that time, Jesus told the disciples what was going to happen. He also told them that somebody in their group was going to betray him, and they all protested, no, no, it can't be, that won't happen. He also told Peter, one of his closest disciples, that Peter was going to say that he didn't know Jesus when the going got tough later on that night and early the next morning. And of course, Peter said, oh, I would never do that. So think about, if you knew you were going to die, how would you feel? Jesus was very, very concerned and worried about what was coming. And he wanted his disciples, his friends, to stay up with him that night to keep him company, because he was dealing with such heavy issues in his mind, and he was looking for support. Unfortunately, the disciples fell asleep, and Jesus was left to worry on his own and pray to God that perhaps he wouldn't have to die. But in the end, he knew that was going to happen. So early on the morning of Good Friday, there was a commotion outside the garden, and the Jewish leaders, along with some soldiers, came to the garden, and just as Jesus predicted, he was betrayed by Judas. Judas kissed him to let the guards and the Jewish leaders know that this was the man that they needed to arrest and take away. And that's exactly what happened. So the Good Friday story continues with the Jewish leaders taking Jesus to their court and having people tell lies about him, and they accused him of doing things that he didn't do. And then ultimately they took him to the governor in Jerusalem, Pontius Pilate, saying that he needed to be put to death because he was not only undermining their authority as religious leaders, but he was also trying to overthrow the government of Rome in Jerusalem. Pontius Pilate really didn't see why Jesus should be put to death, and he tried a lot of things to discourage this, but in the end, he gave in to the crowd that wanted Jesus put to death, and they took him off to be crucified and die a horrible death. After Jesus died on the cross, his body was taken to a grave that a man named Joseph of Arimathea had donated to put Jesus' body in. So he was taken off and put in the tomb, and a stone rolled in front of the tomb to close it off. Then on Sunday, 2 days later, the women who had followed Jesus went to the grave hoping to give the body a proper burial in the Jewish tradition. And when they got there, they had a big surprise. The stone was rolled away from the tomb, and there was no body inside. And there were two men, maybe angels there, who told them that Jesus had risen from the grave. The women hurried back to Jerusalem to find the disciples, who were basically hiding out. They were very fearful that they were going to suffer the same fate that Jesus did if people found out that they were associated with him. So when the women told the disciples that Jesus' grave was empty and that they'd been told that he had risen from the dead, they didn't know what to believe. They weren't quite sure what to do with themselves without Jesus. So the Easter story in the book of Luke concludes with two of Jesus' followers running into a man on the road to Emmaus, a town that was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they walked with this man for quite a long distance and conversed with him. And he was very knowledgeable about the Bible and all the events that led up to the time of Jesus' death. And they were very impressed with that. And they invited him to stay the night with them in the Emmaus, in the town that they were going to. And it wasn't until Jesus sat down to supper with them and broke bread and blessed it that they suddenly recognized that it was Jesus, the risen Lord. So after this review of Easter and the events surrounding it, and Christ no longer being physically in the picture, the disciples are on their own, which takes us to the book of Acts and the story of Stephen. So the disciples were on their own without Jesus being directly with them. And they found themselves having to deal with several hundred, if not a few thousand, followers of Jesus who wanted to follow in Jesus' way and were committed to doing that. But there were only 12 disciples, and there were a lot of demands from the followers of Jesus for help and there were quarrels among people. Not everybody in Jerusalem and the surrounding area at that time uh, spoke the same language even. There were a large group of people who spoke Hebrew, which was the native language of the Jews. But there were also lots of people who had come from other parts of the world to that area, and lots of people who spoke Greek. So there was kind of a rivalry between those two groups. And the Greeks complained that the people that needed help from their side were always getting the short end of the stick, and they wanted something to be done about it. So the disciples realized that they needed to expand uh, the leadership and get more people involved because they couldn't do everything. And that's very much like it is in our church today. Our pastor can't teach every Sunday school class, can't lead every meeting, can't take care of every group all the time. So there are lots of other people who volunteer their time to do the things that are necessary. And that's exactly what the disciples were facing as well. So Stephen was a Greek-speaking follower of Christ, and the disciples told the Greek community to nominate some people that would be in charge of getting the needs of that community met. And Stephen was one of the people they chose. So as it turned out, the people who selected Stephen to work with them made a very good choice. He was smart, he had a lot of energy, he was ambitious, and he knew religious teachings very well. And what's amazing is how the rest of the story of Stephen has remarkable similarities to the story of Jesus' ending days because people were jealous of Stephen. They made up lies about him to get him into trouble. And the same group of people, or the same type of people who plotted against Jesus and did away with him, basically did the same thing with Stephen. So this group was successful in getting the council stirred up and other people stirred up, and they ended up dragging Stephen outside the city gates and stoning him, which means everybody stood around him and picked up rocks and threw them at Stephen until he died. And that's exactly what happened. Stephen became the first Christian martyr, a person who died because of his beliefs. So we're going to take a quick look at our highs, lows, and God sightings for this week. And I want to thank Aaron Robley for making the contributions, which you'll see coming up right now. Well, that does it for this week. I hope you have a really great week and that we have some nice weather next week. See you next time.